Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts, with hosts Margaret Pickoff and Tim Abbey.
Hello and welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and on each episode, I'll be joined by one of my colleagues on the green industry team as a co-host. On today's episode, my co-host is Tim Abbey. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Margaret. It's nice to be with you again.
Nice to have you. On today's episode, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Sara May from the Penn State Plant Disease Clinic. But before we get into our conversation with Sara, we like to check in about what we, your hosts, are seeing out in the field or thinking about at this time of year. Tim, I'm in full conference planning mode right now. So this podcast recording is actually a nice break from that. We've got a lot of events coming up in the winter. And by the time this episode airs, the Green Industry Conference in Ambler will probably be over. But at this point, we're getting all of our planning in before the winter break. And it just makes me think about how our job is a lot of plant stuff, but it's also a lot of like, how many sets of utensils am I going to need for this meeting? And so
there's a lot of things involved with our job that has nothing to do with whatever your educational background is.
Right.
You could be
learning new
crisis
skills all
manager.
The time. It occurred to me yesterday that we should probably have a first aid kit on hand, which I hadn't thought of before. But whenever you get a big group of people together for anything, it's probably good to have some Band-Aids. And anyways, I'm learning as I go. So anyways, but yeah, today we also have our first kind of wintry weather of the season, and we're having some rain and freezing rain here in Philly. And I'm kind of wondering how that will impact our ornamental landscape outside. That's already been hit by a few frosts. But what are you noticing, or what are you working on these days?
Well, it's a great day not to be making any site visits.
Yes.
It's not a warm rain or it's not snow. It's just cold rain. So I'm actually glad to be inside today. But I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, this time of the year, it's more planning for events that are going to be coming up in the start of the new calendar year. This calendar year is pretty much wound down for a lot of work related stuff, I think.
Yeah, lots of planning. Yeah,
I'm ready for it to warm up already. So
yeah, I know. Well, the solstice is 6 days away. So
yeah, I think so. I think next Wednesday.
Days will start getting 1 minute longer every day, or I don't know how that works, but we're all, as plant people, I think we're all looking forward to warmer weather. Well, great. Well, thanks for being here, Tim.
Of course.
Let's get into our conversation with Dr. Sara May, who is the head diagnostician and manager of the Penn State Plant Disease Clinic. So welcome, Sara.
Hi, Sara.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So we like to start out by having our guests describe what their role is. So for you, what's your role at the Plant Disease Clinic, and can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. My job is to examine and test all of the samples that are submitted to our clinic. We get about 1,500 to 2,000 samples every year in our lab. And so it's my job to look at them and test them for different disease problems and diagnose what might be going on, and send information back to the client, the homeowner, or the grower on what we found, and give them information on maybe how to manage the problem if we do find a disease. And so that's basically what I do.
Awesome. And I saw that you studied horticulture at Penn State as an undergrad. How did you sort of land in the field of plant pathology?
That's a good question. So after my first year as a horticulture student, I worked at a nursery over the summer. And so I started working a lot more with plants, and that's where I learned that plants get diseases. And I just found that to be really fascinating. And some of the clients who had bought plants, or it was also a place that did landscaping. So they would bring in their plants and, ask the people that worked there what was wrong with them. And they would try and help them figure out, what sort of disease their plants may have had. And they had some books there that they would look through to try and determine what was wrong. And I just found that to be absolutely fascinating. And when I came back to Penn State, I looked up more information on plant pathology, and I found that we had a department of plant pathology, and you could take classes, and I ended up getting a part-time job there doing work with potatoes. So that's how I got into plant diseases.
That's really cool.
Interesting. Sara, I have a question for you. We'll kind of jump around a little bit. So as you mentioned, you process samples that come in up to the lab from both the general public and from commercial businesses. Is there a tip that you could give to listeners or what's the best steps they need to take to send you in a viable sample that is going to be useful for you on your end?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One thing that we have is instructions on our website, or also there are instructions that we can send to you that describe how to collect a really good sample and send it in. And it gives specific information for different types of samples, since we process everything from, herbaceous annuals and perennials to woody ornamentals to turf grass samples. So we have specific instructions. And people can also call or email if they're not sure what type of sample we might need. But generally, we're looking for samples of plants that are still alive partially. So sending us completely dead material makes it really hard for us to figure out what's actually caused the plant to die. But if it's starting to show symptoms of a problem and it's declining, then that's what we need. And anything from entire plants, if they're small, like transplants or seedlings or small potted plants, to if it's an entire tree, then sending in samples of the branches and leaves and even the roots is generally what we need.
I'll actually admit that I know over the years that I've probably sent you something that was completely dead. I'm hoping though that I at least wrote on it and said, well, I think it might have been this. Any chance you might be able to find it? So I've actually violated your own steps for sending in a good sample.
That's okay. You're not the only one. And, we will always take a look at everything just to see if we can find something. But often when something, has died, then other secondary fungi and bacteria will start to grow, and we can't actually figure out what was the original problem.
Yeah, I think we've all been there as people who sort of work in this industry and are somewhat knowledgeable about plant diseases. I've definitely gotten samples to our office that are completely dead, or it's just like a stick and there's no plant species attached to it. And I think sometimes people feel as though we have this like magic scanner or something that we can like scan and be like, this is what the species is and here's what's wrong with it. And rather than having to go through all these diagnostic steps. And so, yeah, that kind of brings up, so our role, how our role as educators kind of intersects with the work that you do. So we don't get to see you face to face very often, Sara, but we do send you a lot of things. Oftentimes the educators, we are sort of the ones in between the grower, if it's a commercial grower or business, in between the actual plant out in the field and it getting to you. So sometimes we'll do a site visit and check something out. And often we end up taking a sample if we can't diagnose it ourselves or see an insect issue or something and end up sending it to you. And I was actually thinking about the last thing I sent you because it's the holiday season and everyone is like at the post office sending, gifts and things. And I think the last thing I sent you was a rotting pumpkin. So kind of a different sort of, I think that our post office has gotten used to me coming in there with weird things to send to you. But anyways, it does seem as though selection of the sample is really, really important to the accuracy of your diagnosis.
Yeah, definitely. And we can definitely get some very rotting and smelly, slimy samples. So that can be a problem, but getting a good sample is really crucial for us to, be able to narrow down and figure out what might be going on.
Mm.
I got a follow-up question for submitting samples. For some of the newer pathogens, either in the state or in the country, with like boxwood blight being an example, do you need some sort of a heads up from people if they think that that's what they have and are sending it to you? Like, they call or email you?
Yeah, that's a good question. For something like boxwood blight, they don't need to call ahead if they suspect that they have it. We do recommend that they double bag the sample before they send it, just to prevent it from spreading. But if there is something like that, it's new, something of concern, they can absolutely always call to check to see if they should send it to us. Or there might be an instance where if it is something like that, that's regulatory, that we might want them to send it directly to our Department of Agriculture lab. So there's a plant pathology lab there, and we work with them for things like boxwood blight and other pathogens that are of high consequence and are regulated in our state.
So I'm curious, just to take a step back, or I guess it kind of going off of this question, but so when a sample arrives at your doorstep or in your mailbox, can you walk us through what happens to it?
Sure. So when it arrives, we check to see where it came from. If it came from outside of our state, kind of going back to what Tim was saying, we do open it underneath a biosafety hood in case there's something in there that we don't want spreading in Pennsylvania. And, just check out the sample to see what it might be. But we, if it happened to come from out of state, we don't officially accept samples from outside of Pennsylvania. We only accept samples from in the state. But if someone has found us online and just sent it to us, then that's what we'll do. So first we check to see where it came from, then we open it up and we log it into our database. And we ask everyone to submit a form with the sample. We have the form online, or we can send it to people that they fill out with their name and the information on the plant and what they've been seeing. So we enter some of that into our database. And then we give a quick initial examine of the sample just to kind of see if it's something we need to, look at right away or deal with right away. But otherwise it goes into a refrigerator for storage until we get to the step where we start processing it.
Great. And then from there, I'm sure you have a whole slew of diagnostic tests that you would choose from based on what you think you're seeing there, or based on the plant species?
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of different things that we might do. Most of the samples we do look at under a microscope initially just to see if we spot anything. But there are a wide range of different tests that we might do, or culturing from a sample for pathogens, or incubating a sample in what we call a moist chamber, which is basically just a plastic bag or plastic container with a wet paper towel to encourage the development of fungal spores. So those are some of the steps that we might take to make a diagnosis.
And I know this is be a hard question to answer, but when you have to culture something out, whether it's fungal or bacterial, what's the usual time that you have to wait before you get some of those reproductive structures so you can identify?
Yeah, that's a good question. With a lot of the fungi, it can take several days, up to a week or more. With samples like oak wilt on oak, that can even be 2 weeks before we can really tell if it's grown out. So with the fungal pathogens especially, it can really take time for those structures to develop that we need to make an identification. Bacteria grow a lot faster, so that can be a more rapid result, but sometimes there are multiple different bacteria that will grow on a plate, and we have to transfer them and let them grow another day or two till we can see if we identify what might be actually causing the problem.
Yeah, I think it's important for the people listening, when they send in samples, it's not like an immediate diagnosis. A lot of times on your end, it's not like you get it, look at it and go, oh yeah, it's this. There's there is that lag time, not because you're not addressing it, but you have to wait for something to basically grow so that you can actually make that identification for them.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. I think a lot of people think that, it can happen more quickly when it actually needs to take time for something to grow out. We do have some tests that we can run that are, quick, but a lot of times we have to culture something, or even putting it in a moist chamber, we have to wait for those structures to develop. So it's a little different from just identifying something. Like if there's an insect present, then it's just a matter of, looking at it and trying to identify it. Although I do think they have to rear some insects sometimes. So yeah, it can take time. It's not quick. We don't have a little tool that we can scan the sample with and get a quick answer. It usually takes, it often takes 2 to 3 weeks, especially during the busy time of year, for us to turn around our samples.
And I know you're processing a lot of plant material, not just within ornamental plants, but we'll just focus on that since it's our ornamental plant podcast. What are your sort of top 3, top 5 woody plants, or even I guess perennials too, that are constantly problematic, or do you get the most of coming into the lab?
That's a good question. Probably with woody plants, I would say we get a lot of spruce, arborvitae, oaks, and I think, these are just some of the most common plants that are planted in landscapes. So those would probably be, I would say, the top 3 in that category.
I'm always curious about, and something that we're always trying to figure out in the field as well, is sort of abiotic versus biotic, because a lot of things that look like disease can actually be from some sort of abiotic stress. If there is damage to the root system, or it's been a really dry year like we've had this year. I know that I got at least 3 or 4 samples of I think Norway spruce and other conifers that really suffered from the drought that we had this summer, and so they were starting to lose needles, and we weren't sure if that was a disease or abiotic. So what's sort of the breakdown, if you can estimate it, between actually finding a disease that's causing the damage to the plant versus ruling that all out and kind of deciding that it's probably more abiotic?
That's a good question. So are you asking like what maybe percentage of the plants samples that we get?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to go and look, but it's not small. It's probably closer to, 30 or 50% or more that don't have a disease problem on the sample. So I'd have to look at the actual numbers, but there are a lot of samples that we get that we either narrow it down by, so basically what we do is we look for any diseases that might cause those types of symptoms. And if we don't find those, then we narrow it down and say, okay, yes, this could be maybe drought stress, like you were saying on a spruce. If we're not finding any evidence of like a needle cast disease or a branch dieback disease or a root rot pathogen, then we can determine that it could have been due to drought or something like that. And then we also have samples where, maybe we didn't have enough material to test. So it's sort of a inconclusive diagnosis where we weren't able, it could be drought stress, but we didn't get a root sample, for example. So we couldn't test for a root rot disease. So in those cases, we'll send information to the client and maybe recommend that they send a follow-up root sample so we can at least check for that to see if there's something like to, rule that out, even though it could still be something like drought stress. So yeah, it's a very common thing with samples that we might not find an actual disease, and it could be something abiotic like you mentioned, or we might just need more of a sample to examine.
I got a question kind of reverse of all the things that you do provide up there at on campus. Are there certain pathogens that you're not set up to test for? Like I'm thinking of like the commercial testing facility, AgDia, screens for, I don't know how many different types of viral pathogens, but are there certain things that you would refer like a, commercial company to submit their samples to?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. There are a lot of things that we can't test for. So we will recommend, if we get a sample and we suspect it's a certain disease that we know there's another company or another lab that can test for it, then we'll give that information to the client. But another thing that's good to know is if a client is looking for something very specific that they want to have a sample tested for, they can always contact us ahead of time to see if it even is something we can check for. A lot of things we can, look at the symptoms, like rose rosette is a good example. Rose rosette virus, we don't have a specific test for it in our lab, but the symptoms are pretty characteristic. So we can tell the client, yeah, this looks like rose rosette, but we don't have a test. But there are university labs in other states that they can send a sample to and have it tested if that's something that they wanted to do. So yeah, that's a good question.
I would think between, the lab up there at Penn State that you run, and the one at the Department of Ag in Harrisburg, that between the two of you probably, and again, correct me if I'm way off base, but you can catch a lot of the different pathogens that people encounter on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would think so. There's a lot of different things we can test for, and a lot of things that we can, narrow down just based on the symptoms and excluding other disease problems. But we don't always have a very specific test for certain pathogens.
I am curious, Tim had mentioned the plant disease lab in Harrisburg through the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and I'm kind of curious about the relationship that you have with the PDA, because I know, again, it came up earlier in our conversation, but there are certain diseases that are particularly aggressive and dangerous for the plant industry in Pennsylvania. At what point do you have to alert the PDA that you have found a positive diagnosis for a sort of dangerous disease? Is there a list that of the heavy hitters that you sort of are required to let them know about? And for our industry, what does that mean for them when they're sending samples to your lab?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is a federal list. It's called the Select Agent List, and those are pathogens that are regulated on the federal level. So if I find something that is that I suspect is a pathogen that's on that list, I would contact our State Department of Agriculture and also work with USDA APHIS on something like that to confirm if it's one of those. And then also at the state level, we have pathogens that are regulated. So boxwood blight, which was mentioned, is one of those. It's regulated in Pennsylvania. It's found in some other states where it doesn't happen to be regulated in those states, but it is here. So if I find a sample with boxwood blight, then I contact our Department of Agriculture and I contact the client as well and let them know that we found it. And then someone from the Department of Agriculture will contact the client and work with them to eradicate the pathogen from the area that it was found.
I've been here with Penn State 16 years, and during that time, the diseases that I've seen grow significantly for ornamentals have been bacterial leaf scorch on oaks, and then the needle cast diseases of Douglas fir and particularly Colorado blue spruce. Are there ones, would those be ones that you've seen an increase in the lab up on campus, or are there other ones that have become more problematic or common?
That's a good question. Those are definitely ones that we see more regularly. But I don't know if there's been an actual significant increase in the years that I've been in the clinic. That would be interesting to look at. I haven't looked at our sample records to see with like the needle casts in particular. The one that you mentioned, bacterial leaf scorch, is one that previously we weren't testing for. We could identify the symptoms of it and then recommend that the client send the sample to the lab that you had mentioned earlier, Tim, Agdia, which is located in the state of Indiana, so they can test for bacterial leaf scorch. But in the past few years, we have been using one of their kits to test in our lab. So that's one that we have been, getting a better idea of the amount of that might be in the state, just because we can now test for it in our lab. So yeah, that's an interesting question, but we're glad that we can test for that one, at least for now.
Have you gotten any samples of beech leaf disease in the lab up there?
Yes, we've gotten just a handful of samples. I know that our Forest Service and our extension educators in the state are also looking for that disease. We haven't gotten a lot of them, but I don't think beech is an extremely common tree that people grow in their landscapes, so it's more of a problem in our forests. But yeah, that is a new problem that's in almost every county in Pennsylvania, I think, now. And it's caused by a nematode.
How often do you get samples, and this could be from nursery landscape, that have a type of foliar nematode? I don't see it very often.
Yeah, that's true. I don't either. It's not a super common thing that we diagnose, but we do, get a handful of them each year.
And I have a fun question for you. Get off these more serious topics. So as you obviously know more than us, you can get some really nasty stuff coming in, those fungi or bacteria break down plant material that, nasty in that it's slimy and smells just vile looking. What's the most bizarre thing that you've ever had to process in the lab?
That is an interesting question.
Or what's your least favorite thing to have to deal with, I guess, that comes in?
My least favorite. That's a good question too. Yeah. I don't know. The least favorite is probably some of the really stinky samples that we get that maybe have started to rot in the mail. And certain things can smell really bad, like the brassicas when they start to rot, or onions and garlic and potatoes when they start to rot. It can smell really bad. So I don't like processing those.
Yeah, just part of the job, I guess.
Yeah.
I can just imagine I like opening the box or the bag or whatever and just not really knowing what you're going to encounter, but what's on the other side and what it's going to look like and smell like.
Exactly.
Given presentations and tell people about, the steps for sending stuff over, I've told them, make sure that the intake form that you require, I go, that's taped in a separate envelope on the outside of the box or whatever they're sending, so that you have some sort of idea of what lurks inside the box before you have to open it up.
Yes, thank you. That is very helpful. If the form is taped to the outside or in an envelope on the outside of the box, that helps us to figure out what's inside, or if the form's inside, also if it's in not in with the sample, but at least separate or in a separate baggie. I've had to tape together so many forms that have gotten soggy from being mixed in with the plant samples. Yeah. So yeah, those are not my favorite, and the rotting samples. I've gotten bags, just like sandwich baggies of just liquid, brown liquid from a leaf that is completely melted and rotted, or a bag of a liquid tomato fruit. So those are not very fun. Although occasionally I have found diseases in the liquid, but I prefer solid samples.
Hey, I'd be shaking my fist going, people, I'm not a miracle worker. You got to give me something to actually work with here.
It's not a bag of goo.
Yeah, bag of goo.
So we had talked a little bit, or you had mentioned in the beginning that sometimes when samples come in and they've been sitting for a while, not only do you possibly have the original pathogen on the disease, which may or may not still be there, but then you also have these secondary pathogens that can kind of move in later, and it's hard to tell what what damage is being caused by what sometimes. But there are also a lot of diseases that are spread by insects moving from plant to plant and sort of acting as a vector, and nematodes, as we said with the beech leaf disease. So we had interviewed Michael Sclavara a couple weeks ago from the Insect Identification Lab, and he talked a little bit about the connection between your two labs. But I'm curious, from your point of view, when you're getting these samples in How does that work for you when you see maybe some a disease issue going on, but you also see some insect damage? Like, what is that relationship like with Michael's lab?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And we do get plenty of samples that may have both, like you mentioned, a disease problem and an insect problem. Or we'll get samples where there's insect damage, but maybe it's like speckling from spider mites, and clients think, oh, this could be a disease, so they send it to us instead of sending it to Michael first. So how we handle those samples, there are some really common ones that I can identify myself, and I might send the information directly to the client instead of sending it to Michael. But a lot of them we do forward to Michael for him to identify what the insect is and give recommendations to the client himself. So that's a common thing that happens, and I forward samples to him, but I'll look at it first, of course, to see if there's a disease problem. And if there is a disease problem, in addition to the insect problem, I'll let the client know, or I'll just let them know that, we found a potential insect or arthropod problem, and we forwarded it to Michael for him to respond.
Right. So they don't have to worry about sending an additional sample to his lab, because if you detect there's an insect issue, you will automatically forward that to his lab.
That's correct. They can, if they think that there's an insect problem, we do encourage them to send it to him first. Or if they think there might be both, they can always send it to both of our labs. But that's correct. If we do find an insect problem that we can't address ourselves, we'll forward it to him, unless the sample happens to be too small or in too poor of a condition to send it. Then in that case, we'll just give them the information that, we found what might be evidence of an insect problem, but we couldn't, forward it to him. So they should collect a fresh sample to send along to him.
I got a question that'll circle back to some of the earlier ones we had, just on the inner workings of the lab. So you're, processing samples yourself, making identifications, following up with clients, and doing the administrative component of running a university plant pathology lab. Do you have help in the lab with all of your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do have one other person that helps part-time, Jenny Mazzoni. She works part-time as a diagnostician in the clinic, and also works with our vegetable pathology lab the other part of the time. And I also occasionally have help from undergraduate students or graduate students that we either hire part-time in the lab, or they volunteer to help maybe in the summer. So we do get a little bit of help that way. But as far as full-time, it's just me.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm asking that just kind of, again, raise awareness with, people who will be listening, that, and I think in Michael's lab, I think it's just him. I could be wrong. Maybe he has somebody helping him out. Between the both labs, you don't have a lot of people that are processing the volume of samples that come in. So again, that's why, you often don't get like instantaneous identifications back to people. I think extension educators, myself and other people on the green industry team, when people bring us samples or we go out in the field, hopefully, oftentimes we're able to identify something just by sight, and so we can move them along with how they're going to manage it. But oftentimes we can't, or they send stuff to you directly without contacting us. That not everything is an instantaneous identification, and I think it's important that people realize that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tim. It is really important. It does take a long time to process all the samples and write up the information and send it. And I'm also often answering email questions and phone call questions, and it just takes a lot of time to do all of that. And also that 1,500 to 2,000 samples that we get each year, about half of those come in the really busy months of June, July, and August. So, that's our extremely busy time, and we'll have, 2 refrigerators filled with samples that are often, some of them are just waiting for me to be able to start processing them, because it just takes a lot of time to get through all of them.
I did want to make sure that we mentioned too, because I don't think that it's come up yet, that this is a free service, at least as far as I know. Are there any services that you provide in the lab that come with a fee, Sara, or is it all free for Pennsylvania residents?
Yes, that's a good question. Currently, all our services are free. We don't have any for-fee services at the time, but that might be something we offer in the future, maybe for a specialty test or something like that. So I think that's great. I like it about our lab that it's free for residents of our state. There are a lot of other university labs where people have to pay to have their samples processed. So I think it's a nice service that we have for our state.
Can you take email photos from people to try to identify? I would think that, I know when people send me pictures and want me to identify things, particularly if it's like turf grass and it's brown in the middle of the summer, I mean, I can take guesses as to what it might be, but if I'm not there, it's hard to tell. Michael will take them in the lab, but I think insects are much easier to identify, through photos than diseases. But would you take a disease picture, what somebody thinks is a disease on their plant? Photo.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a little bit harder with diseases than, like you mentioned, with the insects. It can sometimes be a little bit easier if they can get a good picture of an insect. But there are a number of diseases that we can often identify from just a photo, like some of the rusts that you see on crab apples and pears, things like that we can identify. So we do accept photos only to be submitted, and if we examine it and we think we need a sample to be able to figure out what's wrong, then we'll reply to the email and let the person know. Our email is plantclinic@psu.edu, so people can submit photos to our email, and it just goes to me and Jenny, and we respond based on the information that they provide to try and figure out what might be going on. We also recommend that if people are just submitting a sample directly, they can send photos along with the sample, because it can be extremely helpful. So they can either print them out and send them, or they can send them to that email address. And just give me their name and information about the sample so that we can connect it with the physical sample that they sent. So yeah, that's a good question. And the turf grass is a challenging one. That one I usually can't identify what the problem is just from a picture. Although it really helps to have a picture, we usually need an actual sample.
I think, like what you said, like with trees, I mean, they can send you what would be considered a good sample from a branch. But it's nice to be able to see pictures of that tree in the landscape to kind of get an idea of the growing environment. And, maybe you can even tell whether it was planted correctly. And, maybe it's an abiotic factor that's causing, the foliar symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, mature trees are a perfect example because there are so many different things that can cause decline in them. And so having photos so we can see what's going on with the tree and see, like you said, what the base of the tree looks like, see if there are any clues as what might be causing symptoms of a branch dieback, whether maybe it's a mushroom that's causing a wood decay or evidence of girdling roots. Those are things we might pick up in a photo that we're not going to see if you just send a branch that's starting to show dieback.
For any people listening who are close to campus, can they bring samples in to the lab in person?
Yes, we accept in-person samples for people who want to drop them off. We are usually there in the lab, or someone is in our offices between about 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. During the work week. So not on the weekends or holidays or days like today when it's very snowy and icy, but people can drop off samples in the lab.
One thing I wanted to ask about, kind of shifting gears here, I saw that you do some work with the National Plant Diagnostic Network, which I subscribe to their emails, but don't know too much about what they do. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that network is and how you sort of work with them and how they might be helpful to our industry.
Sure. So the National Plant Diagnostic Network is a federally funded network of diagnostic labs like ours throughout the U.S. And it helps to connect our labs so that we can communicate about the different disease and insect problems that we're seeing, especially some of those high consequence ones that we were talking about earlier, like boxwood blight. And it just gives us resources for, learning how to diagnose different things and keeping up to date on what's going on in different states. And they provide some funding to help our labs stay functional. And they also have a lot of different committees that work on different areas within the network. So one that I cooperate is called the Protocol and Validation Committee. So that helps to develop and establish protocols for identifying different diseases to help diagnosticians make sure they can have the accurate information they need to do some of the identifications that we do. So it's a great resource, and it's a good network that helps to do that. And they also have some outreach programs where they work through, especially our public gardens in different states, like Longwood Gardens, to work with some of the people there to communicate about important pests and pathogens that we're looking for, and also, have them look for new things that are unusual that they might be spotting that we would want to be aware of.
Yeah, as Tim mentioned, and you have talked about, your staff is very small in the lab, and I'm sure that, it is helpful to have this wider network of other diagnosticians around the country from other universities and other labs to learn from and be supported by, and probably also helps to identify when there are emerging disease problems in regions of the country that are close to you, or maybe not close to you, but that seems like it would be a helpful sort of like alert system as well. So yeah, it's cool to learn about that as a professional organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other professional organizations that you found important in your work?
That's a big one. Also, the professional organization for plant pathologists is called the American Phytopathological Society. So they have meetings every year that plant pathologists can attend, and they have several journals that they publish of research, and they also publish all of the books that are called the compendia. So they have all of the different, diseases that we find in the US in a certain group of plants or crops. So for example, there's a compendium of tomato diseases and pests that have just a lot of great information that diagnosticians really rely on.
That's great. So as we're getting towards the end of our conversation here, Sara, I do just want to ask if there's anything else that you think would be important for members of the green industry who might be using your services to know about the lab or the process for getting you a sample, or how you diagnose things. Anything else that you wanted to add that might be helpful for them? We've covered a lot.
So. Yeah, I feel like we covered all of the highlights, and really just, getting us a good sample and the right type of sample is really important. And I had mentioned those instructions. I do want to highlight for certain diseases like oak wilt, which we had mentioned before, and bacterial leaf scorch on oaks, verticillium wilt, Dutch elm disease, we need, really specific samples to identify those of branches that are still alive, not dead, like we talked about, and are showing symptoms of the disease. So, and one of the reasons for that is those pathogens can show up in just a few branches or one part of a tree and not in other parts. So you can't, I think that's another, misconception, that someone could just send us any branch from their tree and we can figure out what's killing the entire tree. So having the right type of sample is really important, because it's possible that we could test a sample and it comes back, negative, that the disease isn't there, but it's actually is there in another part of the tree. So we have instructions for that on our website. And if anyone isn't sure what type of sample we need, they can always email or call us to find out what type of sample to collect.
Perfect. Yeah, there's a great video on the website about collecting and packaging samples that I've watched many times as I've gone to prepare my own samples. And also, again, that's a role that we horticulture educators can help play as well, is if you you're having an issue and would like us to come out to your business, you can contact your local extension office and see if you can arrange a site visit, and we can also help to collect and send that sample to you.
Absolutely, yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sara. We like to end our conversations on a slightly more personal note. And since we're at the end here, we thought we would ask you what you like to do when you're not working in the plant disease clinic.
That's a good question. I do actually really enjoy gardening, even though it's kind of hard because I'm so busy in the clinic during the summer. But I love, growing a vegetable garden and also some cut flowers and trying to keep them alive, even though I'm looking at dying plants all day.
Yeah, I kind of, vegetables are such a good source of disease that I'm sure there's fun stuff for you to look at in your own garden from time to time.
Yes, there usually is. And I get excited about it, even though it's causing a problem in my garden, but I like seeing diseases even in there.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Well, I want to thank you and Jenny for all the help that you provide me over the years. I'm embarrassed to admit the number of samples that I send to you on an annual basis, because I know my role as an extension educator is to decrease the volume of samples that come into your lab. But it just, some of those diseases, either I have no idea what it is, or I might have a couple of thoughts, but I need your expertise. So thank you.
No problem. We're happy to help. And there are definitely instances where we're in the lab going, wow, I have never seen anything like this myself before. So we do occasionally get unusual things that we can't figure out. So we're happy to help with those. And you shouldn't feel bad if you're sending us something that you aren't sure about.
Yeah, definitely an invaluable service that you guys provide. And thank you again. This has been such a great conversation, and I hope that our listeners have learned more about the clinic and will utilize it as a really important resource. So thank you, Sara. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
No problem. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Bye.